Welcome back, aviators. Before I get started, I just wanted to give a big shout out to Greg from FRC Foamies. We had a lot of discussion about the Alpha Jet MK2 and he suggested to do the MIG-29. So here it is, Greg. Built it just like you'd asked. Do a quick review on the builds and then we'll go into electronics and impressions after that. So the build's pretty easy. Did Dollar Tree foam all around, did a little bit of filler inside to clean everything up. I did use some foam inside here. After I put the glue in, I put some foam in to kind of curve it up. And on the nose, I did the drywall filler. I kind of like the drywall filler, but it doesn't add any rigidity, where after you glue the foam in, it adds a bunch of rigidity, although it's not as smooth as the drywall. This is kind of a test bed for a couple different techniques, so we're going to see how they work and how they go. First, added two carbon rods to the wing plate. One change I'd make for my next one, which I will be making the next one, is take this aft carbon rod and run it all the way to the wingtip. As you can see here, it's got a lot of flex in the wingtip. It's not necessarily a bad thing, especially in slow-fi. With a little bit of loading on the wing, it'll give a little bit of dihedral, which will help for stability in high alpha. In the elevators, I've got carbon rods all the way across on both sides. Another change I would do for the next one is run a single carbon rod all the way across. I'm not sure why I didn't do it on this build, but I didn't. In the vertical stabilizers, you see I've got carbon rod, 3mm going all the way up through it. I don't think I would make any changes with the vertical stabilizers. I think they're going to be just fine. The build itself is mostly done with Foam-tac, a little bit of hot glue just to spot weld some things in place. A good example of that would be the vertical stabilizers. I ran a bead of glue of Foam-tac all the way down the stabilizer, and on the back side where it goes through, I put some hot glue underneath where the keyways are, just to hold it in place, to hold it down nice and tight so I could walk away from it. With this build, you use little angle brackets that they set up in the plans to help give you the right angle for the vertical stabilizers. And you can see they've got a little bit of a cant out. I'm not exactly sure what the angle is, but that's what it is. The build went together very nicely. It's your typical score and fold. So on the nacelles, I did just your regular score and fold, and I filled it with little pieces of foam all the way around. The next time I build this, I'm going to do the score and fold, but I'm going to do it inverted. So you'll put the tape on one side, and then you'll cut little angles on the inside and fold it so that the tape is on the outside. That way you don't have to do any kind of extra stiffening to add rigidity. The tape will hold the outside together when a bead of glue will hold the inside together. For this, I used the drywall tape, and I used an epoxy resin to stiffen up that drywall tape, otherwise it wouldn't really stick. On the right side here, I did a tiny little sliver of hot glue all the way around the fiberglass tape to keep it stuck nice and tight to the nacelles, and it worked really, really well. My other test bed was on the other side where I didn't use any of the hot glue. I just wanted to see if the drywall tape would stick with just the resin. And it kind of did, but it kind of did not. In some spots, you'll be able to tell that it kind of sticks up a little bit, which isn't terrible, but it's not good either. And there's another spot down on the inside of the nacelle here. So in hindsight, a little bit of hot glue or Foam-tac or what have you. I ran out of Foam-tac during the build. A little bit would go a long way in keeping everything nice and tight. The wing plate went together really nice. I love the leading edge slats. That's key for flying in high alpha. No KF4s, no KF2s on the wing plate. Everything's just straightforward flat wing plate with the leading edge flap. When installing the electronics, I would suggest you leave the ribs out, the horizontal ribs. If you look at the plans, there's little squares, probably half-inch by half-inch squares that you're supposed to run all your wires through. If I had to do it all over again, I would cut out a little triangle in the center of the ribs where it meets the longitudinal rib, and I would just stick all the electronics in the corner there. And that would keep it down nice and flat, and it would keep the wire length just a little shorter. With the electronics that I have in here, it became a problem where I had to actually use extensions, servo extensions, and wire extensions for the motors, which I didn't really want to do, but because I'd already installed those ribs, it became an issue. So in hindsight, I would install the longitudinal rib and leave it there, run all the wires, then install the vertical ribs or the horizontal ribs afterwards, and I would completely leave off this upper plate piece until all the electronics are in and tested and fitted, and to make sure everything works great. For the nose went together just fine, no problems at all. The canopy went together just fine. I was in a rush and was excited, so I put the canopy together first, and then I put it on the upper plate, and it fits. It just doesn't fit great. If you look, this is all the way down, and it's got a little bit of play in here. It just doesn't fit perfectly, but it fits well. If I had to do it all over again, I would wait and do the canopy and everything last. Once everything else is done and shaped, then I would fit the canopy onto the fuselage. It's not too bad. There's a little bit of gap in here that might help with cooling of all the wires that are in here. It's a real hot mess for wires, but it went together pretty well. One of the notes for the nacelles is that I noticed with specifically my build that when you cut out the pieces for the nacelles, the lower edge on the outside was straight, but the inner edge for the nacelle was kind of curved. And so when you tried to set it on to the wing plate, it wouldn't sit. It would kind of rock back and forth. And so I just laid out a big ruler and cut it pretty straight. And that worked out pretty well. What I did not check was a longitudinal rib, and that may have not been straight also. I would highly suggest checking that to make sure it's perfectly straight when it's in the plans before you get it on. And that way you can make sure that your entire wing plate is perfectly flat. The outside of the nacelles wasn't too bad. It was good, but there was a little bit of curvature I had to fix. The inside was much different, where I had to probably take out about 2 millimeters of thickness in the middle of it, so it did that rocking motion. Another thing I would do when I'm talking about the scorn fold with tape on the outside is I would be able to lay beads of glue in, fold it over so the glue's holding it, and set it inside the wing plate. And after it dries, I can pull it back out, and that way it's all set up and ready. Then I can lay all my electronics on the inside. The only electronics I have inside the nacelles are the servos and servo control rods for the elevators, which have the motors installed. Another build tip for me that I ran into is the covers for the top edge of the leading edge of the wings, the top of the wings, is that they had a slight curvature in them up in the front where it made it very difficult to put against the fuselage. It's pretty easy to fix. I just tacked on the bottom edges here, laid it over, and then just cut it with a razor blade, just like I normally would anything else. I was able to take the little tack pieces of glue off, and then I cut 45-degree angles, maybe even a little bit more, on the underside of both of these plates. That way they sit nice and flush, and just ran a little bead of glue around it to kind of hold it in place. Other than those suggestions, the plans went together flawlessly. There was no issues. Just me taking my time and trying to be really precise about the build itself and really evaluate what's going on took me a long time. This build's got probably 20 hours into it, where I could normally build this in 6 to 8 hours. But I wanted to take my time, make sure everything looked right, and try a couple different techniques like filling with the wall putty or filling with little pieces of foam. Just filling with the foam took an hour and a half in itself, doing the top of the fuselage and both in the nacelles. Once again, thank you very much to Greg for FRC Foamies for sending me this plan. That way I could do a build and review it. And also it's my first twin engine build, so I'm very excited to fly it. So thank you very much, Greg, and soon enough we'll be flying this guy. Just waiting for some good weather. Next thing I'd like to talk about is the electronics. The electronics on this thing gave me a run for my money. It was very confusing and very intimidating for myself to put 2 motors on an aircraft. I've never done it before. I didn't even have two of the same electronic speed controls, so I had to purchase that. I had to purchase the batteries, the motors, the props, everything. So it was all kind of a fresh endeavor, and Greg was extremely helpful in that process. I know I sent him messages probably 10, 12 times, asking him about the different things. He would always say, you know, you're doing fine, this is what you're doing, look for something like this, and then we would go on from there. He sent me a bunch of links to different things and would explain why he was choosing them for nothing, because that's what we're into this hobby for, is for helping each other and having a lot of fun. So I got the Quantum BE1806 motors. They're 2700 kV. Running the props are 5 by 4.5, and they're opposite. The left motor is a clockwise rotation, the right motor is a counterclockwise rotation. For servos, for the elevons, I have two high-tech 85 Metal Gear servos in there. I haven't used these servos in any of my park jets because they're gigantic and super heavy, and it's the only Metal Gear servos I have. If I thought there was ever an application for it, it would be with the twin motor and all the weight that that adds and all the stresses with flying. So I put them in here. They're inside the nacelle. For the wings and the ailerons, I use high-tech 55 servos. They're plastic gear, nothing special. I just find that they're a high-quality servo that I've had for 15 plus years, and I've only had one that ever went bad. And just like that, high-tech was able to replace it, no problem. For the rudder servo, it's a Tower Pro 9-gram servo. After going through the electronics and setting it up, I don't think rudders will be necessary, but I wanted to build it so that I could do everything I possibly could with the setup. So it's got rudders, it's got ailerons, elevons with the motors on it, and it's got mixing with the motors for the rudders. The wiring schematic for this thing is difficult, but not impossible. A couple YouTube videos, it's super easy. Basically what I did is the left electronic speed control, I took the signal wire out, and that goes straight into the aux channel. The left speed control has all three wires, plugs into your standard throttle. There's a Y harness that connects both ESCs for the battery, just like a normal twin engine setup would. The way I had to mix it was with the radio. You can do it with wires, but I wanted to keep all the weight down, so I wanted to do everything I could with the radio. Now once I installed all the servos, I realized that I couldn't do mixing with the motors and rudder while mixing elevons and getting flaps. So in the future, I'm going to try to figure out how to do all the servos independently, so I'll have them all plugged in to one receiver and have them work together. I'm not sure if it's even possible with the motors and the receiver and the radio that I have, but I'm going to give it a shot. But for now, what I did is I took the wiring diagram off of RC Power's that he uses for all of his mixes, and it has one onboard mixer and two Y harnesses. It's decently easy to set up. I ran into a problem with the setup, and the elevons and the ailerons weren't working the right way. I just started changing some of the plugs. One goes on top of the mixer, one goes on bottom, and I just switched those two. Then the next one went into the Y harness, and I switched those two, and all of a sudden, it all worked. So the Y harness, the two Y harness, and one mixer works out pretty well. It's in the ebook guide that he has, and also if you just go in to the help section in RC Powers, you can go through the electronics and it'll have the layout right there, and I'll attach a copy of that in the description below. So the way it's set up is I've got ailerons, I've got elevons, and a rudder, and also with the rudder I have mixed in with the motors. Let's open up the canopy and see what's inside. So inside the canopy, it doesn't look too terrible. Got my Lemon RX receiver, got a battery just sat in here just for the runs, and you can kind of see the mixture and the mass of motors, or speed control wires and servo wires that are in here. All of it run into one receiver up inside the canopy. Here's your Y harness for the battery, and those go back. And down in the bottom here you can see the mixer. I tried to keep everything as far forward as I possibly could, so the mixer is just set inside the foam, nothing special. It's not glued or taped in, but one wire goes to one side, one wire goes to the other, so it's not going to move laterally, and it's not going to move fore and aft because it's stuck in between the foam. Bottom side is where I have the two elevon servos. They're just set right onto the wing plate, nothing special. I saw one, I forget who it was, but they put little pieces of foam as like ramps so that the air would flow nicely over the servos. Maybe I'll do that on the next one. It doesn't add very much weight at all, and it would definitely make it much more aerodynamic. So I'll probably try that on my next version. Alright guys, well that's it for this part. I'm going to set up the electronics and we'll go ahead and look at the control surfaces and what they're doing. Alright, so we're back with you. Got all the electronics turned on now, so we're going to talk about the control surfaces. As normal, you have the elevon mix. So the ailerons and elevators work together for the roll, and just the elevator for pitch. For rudder, we've got the rudder set up on one servo, plus the motors are mixed in. So if you want to go left, you push left on the stick, the rudders come left, but the right motor spins. and vice versa for the right side. Push the stick to the right, the rudders go to the right, but the left motor spins. Wasn't too hard to set up. There's a quick YouTube video on it for my specific radio. Followed it probably 3 minutes later, it's all set up. So low rates I've got set for 15 degrees up and down and left and right. For the high rates, I flip 2 switches, one for elevator, one for aileron, and I get 30 degrees. It's probably going to be way too much, but I wanted to make sure I had enough. I can always come back to the 15 degrees. The rudder's still set up for 15 degrees left and right, and with the motors helping, it's probably going to be way too much yaw. But I'd like to see what it's able to do. I want to push the flight envelope and see if I can't get myself into a whole lot of trouble in my very first flight. I don't have any mixing for flaps. It's something I didn't add on this one. The plans come with flaps so that you can put a set of flaps here and mix it in and put the flaps in on a switch. I usually do that with my ailerons, but I run it all the way across so that they have more authority in the air. But this time, with the mixes I was doing, it just wasn't available. I'm working on that, but we'll get there. As far as power goes, it feels like it's going to have plenty of power. It wants to jump out of my hands right away, and I'm pretty excited to fly it. I've never done twin motor, and I've never done something where the rudders are mixed in with the motors, so I think I'm going to have plenty of yaw control. The up and down elevator, especially with the motors being on the elevator, is going to be plenty, and the roll using ailerons and the elevator should be plenty as it is. That's it, guys. That's all I got for this video. This is the walk around of the FRC Foamies MIG-29. Once again, thank you. Huge shout out to Greg from FRC Foamies for all of his help. Great sounding board, lots of advice, and always willing to help. If you guys haven't looked him up already, you should probably look him up. He's on YouTube, and he's also on the RC Powers website. So thanks again, guys. Have good luck.